My name is Patty Bernard. I'm a member of the Nevada Women's History Project. Today is Thursday, September 28th, and we are doing this interview in Reno, Nevada through the generosity of the Robert Z Hawkins Foundation. Today we are interviewing Cheri Emm-Smith, who is a farmer, a judge, and an attorney all in one. Thank you so much, Cheri, for interviewing with us. We appreciate the time that you've taken out of your day to come and sit with us. I know you have an interesting story of family life. Can you talk a little bit about your formative years?
Let's see. I'm the youngest out of 6 children. My dad is or was Paiute. Grew up in Yerington, Wellington, Smith Valley, Schurz, and my mother was she's English, Irish, Scotch, Dutch, red hair and blue eyes, and she was grew up in Arizona and Texas, and her family were migrant workers, and they ended up in Fallon and were introduced there and were married for years and years and years, 50, 60 years. And there's 6 of us. I'm the youngest out of 6, 3 brothers, and I have 2 sisters.
And I believe you're a twin?
I am a twin. I'm the youngest of twins, and my twin is 7 minutes older than I am, so she was always the oldest. So, I went to grade school in Fernley for first and second grade. In 3rd grade, I went to school in Arizona, and then we moved back to Schurz in my 4th grade. We always spent summers in Fernley or in Schurz. We went to school in Fernley for a little bit, but we always went back to Schurz and grew up in Schurz. And I went to grade school from 4th grade to 8th grade in Schurz, and then commuted to Yerington to go to high school. Played sports. We always played sports. It was boys against girls, basketball, softball, farming, all of the rural life.
And after high school?
After high school, I went to UNR, and with my twin and I both went to UNR, and I graduated out of UNR in 1983 with a bachelor's in business. And then I worked for a year, and then I went to law school at Arizona State in Tempe, Arizona.
Well, that leads us to the next question, which would be obviously getting to a judgeship and going through law school was a large ambition. And did you have this interest always, or when did you get an interest in the law?
My dad went to law school. That's why we moved from Fernley. In 1969, I think, he went to the summer law program in Albuquerque for American Indians, and did the summer program. He was teaching school, had 6 kids, and a daughter-in-law and a grandchild on the way. And he went and did law school for the summer. When he came home, he really enjoyed it, really liked the experience, but it was so out of reach to go to law school. And Justice Canby, who is on the 9th Circuit, called him up in September and said, "Do you want to go to law school?" And he said, "Yeah, I would, but I don't see a way." And Justice Canby said, "If you want to go, get there." And my dad said, "I haven't applied anywhere." And Justice Canby said, "Don't worry about it, we'll deal with it." And he went to law school, and that's why we moved to Arizona for the 3rd grade. And I remember walking through the law school and seeing the people in the classroom, thinking they must be so smart. I was so astounded by the experience. And then we moved back to Schurz because being rural kids in a city, we struggled pretty hard. And then my dad commuted for a couple of years from Arizona to Schurz while he went to school, and we stayed insurers. But that was the first thought I ever had about going to law school. And then I didn't think too much about it after that. Getting through UNR and life in general was just a lot. And then one December, I was sitting in my apartment up here. I was working for Soil Conservation Service and struggling to pay the bills, and I looked around, my plant was frozen, and I thought, there has to be more to life than this. And I was reading the UNR sagebrush, and the LSAT was being advertised, that it was being given in 2 weeks. So I called my dad and I said, hey, if I take the LSAT, would you pay for it? He said, sure. And I said, I'm late, so there's a late fee. He says, that's okay. And I, not knowing any better, I went in and took the LSAT, and I did okay, enough to get into school. Not my best performance, but enough. And I went to ASU. I went to the summer law program at University of New Mexico for American Indians. Did that for that summer, and then the following September I went to ASU in Arizona State at Tempe and went to law school. That was daunting. There were, I think at that time, 45,000 students in the school. I was walking with a professor, and she says, you know, it's really overwhelming to go down to the student union, the food court at noon when there were so many students. I said, you think this is intimidating for you? We don't even have a stoplight where I come from. It was quite the culture clash.
I know in Nevada that two cultures often intermingle, and so I'm not sure that all of our observers or our listeners would. Your dad was Paiute and your mom was Irish. Can you tell us a little bit how they met?
My parents met in Fallon in front of Kent's grocery store. I think probably around 1950, somewhere in there. My mom was with her good friend, Emma Van Komen, and I think it's Emma Ferguson is her maiden name. And they were walking down the street, and Emma knew the local kids from Fallon because she grew up there, where my mom was just visiting her grandparents. And my dad was going to high school in Fallon. He was living with my aunt Hazel Cook, and was going to high school there, and they met on the street, and Emma introduced her to my dad, and that's how they ended up meeting. My parents ended up getting married. I'm not exactly sure when. They never said the date. My dad went down to the clerk's office in Fallon and tried to get a marriage license, and the miscegenation laws did not allow a Native American, an American Indian, to marry a white person. And so my mom moved to Sacramento for six weeks, got her residency, and then they ended up getting married somewhere in California. They joked about it in the middle of the night in Lodi at some justice of the peace house, but that's about all that they would say. They never said too much more about that.
Living then back in Fallon, is that correct?
They lived in Gaps for a while. They lived in Schurz. Dad tried to get in, he applied to UNR twice, and they moved up here, and he thought he was admitted, and he went to enroll in classes, and they told him they lost his application, so he could not get into UNR. They would not admit him into UNR. So he ended up going to Wyoming on a track scholarship, and then he went down to San Jose, to Modesto Junior College, and ran track for Modesto Junior College, and then he ran for San Jose State, ran track down there, and graduated from San Jose State. After that, they came back, and he was teaching school in Schurz, and then Fernley, and then he went to law school, and then came back to Schurz, and we were farming.
So at that point in the 50s, did they experience discrimination as a biracial couple?
In the 1950s, my parents had a lot of discrimination. where people would not talk to my mom because she was white. People would not talk to my dad because he's Native. Mom said that people would look at them and like they should not be together. And I think it's kind of what you make of it. They ignored it and did whatever they were doing anyway. I know my mother's family treated my dad very well. And my dad, my grandmother didn't speak English, at least in front of my dad. And so Mom she said she was very kind to her and would give money for my brother's shoes and things, but she passed away. My grandmother, my dad's mother, passed away early on in the marriage, and so there was not a lot of communication there. But we've always lived in church. Mom's always been part of the family, so we've always had that mixed cultural relationship.
With a foot in each.
Right.
Did you face discrimination growing up?
Yes. Yes. Growing up and not so much in first and second grade because you don't notice it. In third grade, there was, and I don't know if it was so much me as we were going to school in Phoenix, and there was a bunch of us kids, and there was a little black girl, and she was drinking out of a water fountain, and the other kids said, "Oh, don't drink out of that water fountain. She's drank out of it. She's black, blah, blah, blah." And they were hateful, angry to her. And it just broke my heart. And I put my arm around her and I said, "I will be your friend." But that was the first blatant racism the angry, ugly racism that I ever saw. And then coming back to Schurz, you get that, well, you're white, and then you get, in high school, I had the hardest time telling apart blondes. The color blonde, all the blondes looked alike. And it's awful to say, now I'm better, but when I was a freshman, I had the hardest time telling these young women apart because they all looked alike to me. But there has been, in law school, that was when there was some fighting going on. The Pima Reservation had shut down one of the main thoroughfares in Scottsdale. And there was some, well, who do these Indians think they are? And it took me back, the anger and the meanness that was directed toward Native people, just because they were Native. And, similar to when I was the district attorney, there was a county commissioner who I was from the wrong side of the lake. I was a woman. I was everything that he detested. And he made it very clear that I was everything he detested. And there were times when I was truly afraid, physically afraid that I would get hurt because of that. I would receive phone calls from different people in the community, "Are you okay?" And because he had been making threats. I don't know. I don't know why he did that. I don't know.
So you were discriminated both as a female,
right,
and a Native American.
Right.
Let's hope that there
we
were
move on.
very few of those events, but there are always people like that.
There are some.
Tell me, how did you feel when you got that law degree?
I was so proud. I was so totally amazed that I had accomplished that. And my dad and my parents came down, and my sister, and my dad brought his brother, who was a World War II veteran and hadn't been out of Yerington in a long time, and just the amount of people at the graduation, it was just amazing that there were so many people that, and it was quite amazing. There was a lot of people that said, "It's a nice dream, it's a pipe dream, you'll never make it," and it was an accomplishment that I'm very proud of.
Now you have a law degree. It's rather expensive to start out a private practice. What were your decisions once you had that degree?
When I got the degree, well, I got the degree and I had clerked that summer, so I had a job right out of law school, even though I hadn't passed the bar, with Judge Reckonsone out of Fallon. And that was very nice, knowing that I had a job and I didn't have to worry about whether I passed the bar or not. But when I took the bar, I thought, oh no, I knew as soon as I took the bar exam that I had failed. Because it was so difficult. And I went home and cried, and then I signed up for the California bar because I figured, well, I'll just practice in the meantime, because Nevada only gave it once a year then. And so I signed up for the California bar, and then the Nevada bar results came in, and I passed that, but by that time I was already signed up for California, so I took the California bar and I passed that one as well. I got the word that I had passed the Nevada bar, and I was going home. I was so excited because I didn't think I had passed, and so excited. And I drove into Schur's, and my dad's cutting hay, and I was, he's the only one that I really cared whether I passed or not. He was my mentor, and I had a fairly long skirt on. I grabbed my skirt and hiked it up and ran in my high heels chasing this father down the field and saying, I passed. That was...
And so, when did you decide that you were going to run for district attorney? What were the circumstances?
I had been a prosecutor for, I think, 8 years or so in Fallon. And I was doing private practice, and I was very happy doing private practice. I was with Wes Williams, and the district attorney in Mineral County had resigned, and I had received a couple of phone calls. Why don't you apply? Why don't you apply? And I loved being a prosecutor. I loved doing the right thing, wearing the white hat, and making a difference. And I lived in Mineral County, and I think at that point, Wes and I were the only attorneys in Mineral County, I think. And so I decided, why not? Why not? And so I applied, got appointed by the county commissioners, and then I had to run 6 months later in the next election. And ran. I was opposed. I don't remember. He was a kind gentleman. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. And won the election, and then I was unopposed for the second election. So.
And did you have any idea about running for election, financing, campaigning?
I had no idea. No idea on the political side of it, the campaigning or any of that. Barbara Thornton and Bill Thornton were my consultants. My former boss had run, so I talked to him a little bit, got some signs, and posted the signs up and ran, and.
Was there personal contact, door to door, or flyers?
I did some of the door to door. I did the flyers, some of the parades, but there was that was about it. That was more just working. There wasn't a lot of time to go out, and I had a part-time deputy, so I was busy working instead of trying to politic. So, but I did some door to door, but not a lot.
So now you hit the second level, you got your license, and now you're a judge. How did you feel? Did you feel like you could make a difference? Why did you run for district attorney?
Well, for district attorney, I did the best I could, and I think I did make a big difference. Judge Blake, we started the drug court program down in Mineral County. I think it's the 11th judicial district. Back then it was the 5th. And there is no other drug treatment program in the community in Mineral County. And so I think there are a number of people who went through the drug court program that really did well, were successful, and I think we have made a difference in people's lives there. And that was one of the changes that I saw through the drug court program, is one of the reasons why I wanted to become a judge. I'm the Yerington Municipal Court judge, and I have my own little program where I set people up for reviews. If they do well, then I don't need to call them in for reviews, but if they're struggling with their fine payments or with the special conditions of a sentence, I'll have them come in every 2 weeks and see how they're doing. And a lot of times I leave it up to them and ask them, well, when do I need to see you again? In 1 week, 2 weeks, or a month? And it's interesting that quite a few say, I need to see you right now. I need the consistency, and just somebody to check on them and make sure that they're doing okay. Which is sad that they have to wait for a judicial system to find that kind of support, but I call that a win.
So was this, as far as cases, drug and alcoholism, was that the largest part of the court?
Out of the cases that I've done, and I was the conflict public defender in Churchill County for a while, and out of the cases I've seen, probably drugs and alcohol would be 93-95% of the problem, or at least a factor in the criminal cases. I don't know about divorces, are a whole different animal, but on the criminal cases, I would say it's about 94-95% of the problem. If they deal with the alcoholism, the drug abuse, and the circumstances that put them there, that's why people, that and income. People who do not have a sufficient income to make ends meet find a way to survive, and sometimes that's not all the way on the legal side. People get desperate and they do what they need to do.
And so there was no drug court in that area?
In Mineral County.
In Mineral County? Right.
Judge Blake is the one that caused that to happen. Him and Judge Breen ride the circuit, and they come down. They have drug court every 2 weeks, and last I checked, they were still doing well, and I think they're still the only program that is available.
Were there any stories from those associations that are in your mind that were a real success?
From the drug court?
Nothing really.
Not that I can recall. The one case that affected me the most as a prosecutor, there was a little girl. She was 11 years old, and she disclosed that she had been molested, and she did it to protect other little children that were being exposed to her molester. And she has stayed with me for years and years, and it's been 30 years. And she is still close in my heart and close on my mind. I see her every now and then, and she does well.
So that's a real success story.
That's a success story. That's one that I have impacted positively, and she has told me so.
I know you do a lot of pro bono work.
Not as much as I should.
Tell us a little bit about that part of your life.
The pro bono work, it's very rewarding, but usually it was in family law that I did the pro bono work. It's very difficult. Emotionally, it's very difficult because you see people in need, and and conflicts and true heartbreaking, there's both sides there. And a lot of times there's no right answer, no correct answer. And that's part of the judicial system. You have this adversarial process in the family setting that is not always conducive to long-term relationships. So that's somewhat difficult.
Did you find that there were the number of people in those areas, rural areas, there were not very many folks that did pro bono, or were you pretty much it? Or
There is hardly anybody doing pro bono out in the rurals, and at this point I don't do a whole lot of practice. What I find myself doing is people are have questions about the legal system and questions about the process and what do I do here. I find myself answering more of those general questions and trying to give them direction, or this is where you can go. And the court, Washoe County Courts has a website where legal forms are, and just more telling people here's the resources, as limited as they are. Here's where you can go, and this is what you need to look for and watch for this, that type of thing.
do you find that area is underrepresented?
Oh, everywhere. People come into courts all the time and can't afford the process, with or without an attorney. It's just so debilitating income-wise. And that was the biggest problem I had doing my private practice, is I would have people getting divorced and custody cases and criminal cases, and they didn't have the resources to fight the battle, and I didn't have the means to subsidize the battle, and it was, it's just a difficult situation. I don't know what the answer is.
What motivates you? What keeps you going? And I guess that would be divided into two. I would assume your legal life would be one. That would be much harder than your farming life, but you obviously hit many obstacles in this process. What kept you going?
What keeps me going initially was fear. Fear that I would not be able to take care of my children financially. That was my main motivation. And unfortunately, after they got older, I realized I should have spent more time with them. Now what keeps me motivated and interested is what surprise is around the corner. Who am I going to meet what new person am I going to meet today? What old friend am I going to run into? What new opportunity is going to present itself? It's just interesting to see what new thing that presents itself, unexpected presence that will surprise me.
You've talked about your dad, obviously, as a role model, but were there other role models or people that inspired you?
There are so many people who have inspired me, and that's one of the things that keep you going. What new life friend am I going to meet tomorrow? The one who has inspired me the most, or taught me the most, as far as education, is Barbara Thornton. I remember I was probably 10 years old, and met Barbara, and she was commuting from Reno to BYU to get her degree. And I was so impressed at what dedication that a woman would travel and commute that far and balance the family and balance her professional life, and it was so foreign to me. My mom was a homemaker, and that was her, that's what she did. And that was all, that was her dedication. But to see Barbara commuting out of state to get her degree, it was like, wow. And that's about the same time that my dad was going to law school. And so the education and the commitment and the depth that you incur emotionally and with your family just to further your education, that was one of the biggest motivators and inspirations. Carla Butko is my current inspiration. She is an attorney here in Reno, and she was sick, had cancer about 10 years ago. And she is just a wonderful person. The things she does, she's a brilliant criminal attorney. She wins more cases at the Supreme Court of more than anybody I know. But she is so kind and so understanding of life's issues. And she surprises me every time I turn around with something new that she comes up with. She's a great inspiration. The person, my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, that I have never met, I think of her often, and I don't know what happens spiritually or what happens when you pass, but I feel her walking with me a lot. She was orphaned when she was about 4. And I think that's where my fear of survival comes from, this generational trauma thing that we have. She was orphaned when she was very small and lived in a time, she was born around 1888, 1890, somewhere in there. And just living in that transition period. She was not a American citizen because Native Americans did not become citizens until 1924. And she had seven children. But just surviving through that time period is just amazing. How you can live through a time where she did not read. My dad said when she would go to the store, she would buy groceries by the picture on the can. She did not speak English in front of my dad. Whether she knew English or not, I don't know. I'm assuming she did because she worked for some of the ranches. But just the survival and the strength it takes to survive, especially in that time period.
What was her name?
Emma John. And then she married George M. That's where my name comes from. Whether he's my grandfather or not, I don't know. And then she was married to Mac Patty, who was my dad's stepdad. And my dad said he was a very wonderful, nice, kind man. They were up here, they camped up here. My dad's family would come up here and they would camp up off of Lake Street, is the stories I heard. Because the Indians were not allowed in the motels and restaurants and that. And they would come to town and they would camp off of Lake Street. And they would come up and spend a couple days up here instead of driving back and forth because it was so far out of Yarrington. And they said Mac came back one day and his hair was standing up and he had turned white and he couldn't talk. And the explanation was that he must have seen a ghost, must have been spooked. Looking back, my dad said he probably had a stroke. And so then he passed away not too long after that. My father's mother, Emma John, my dad was the first one in his family to graduate from 8th grade. And her and Mac went and got him a nice sports coat and a pair of pants, slacks for graduation. And looking back at it, Dad said it was probably a month's worth of their earnings to make him dress nice have the opportunity to dress nice for graduation. And he graduated, and then shortly thereafter, his brother Jerry passed away from tuberculosis. Jerry was 26 when he passed away from TB, and his nephew Kenneth, who was 5 years older than my dad, passed away like the day after, and they had they buried them on the same day. And my dad was sitting with my grandmother, and they were talking about what they were doing. And he said, "Well, Mom, I'm going to go lay down." And she grabbed his arm and said, "Stay here with me, sleep by me tonight, because Kenneth is out on the porch." And the body was out on the porch. He didn't realize that. And they buried them on the same day. So she lost her son and her grandson, who she had raised, on the same day. They buried them together. And I don't know, that's part of that survival. I don't know how people survive those type of traumas. It's just too hard to comprehend sometimes.
Some people have books or people that are inspirational or important in their life. Was there anything like that made a difference to you in your life?
The book, one of the books that is my go-to when I'm having a difficult time, when I'm having a good time, is the book of John in the New Testament. And I look at the trials and tribulations that Christ went through, and I think, who am I to complain? And that there is always a bigger plan. The second book is Corbett Mack, and it was written by Michael Hittman. And Michael Hittman is an anthropologist out of New York, I think Long Island, and he would bring a sack full of groceries and some cigarettes to this old man and sit down and take his oral history and what it was like growing up about the same time that my grandmother grew up and what it was like in Mason Valley. And it's a very controversial book. It shows people in not as good of light as they would probably like to. Some people call it a gossip and throw it in the trash. Other people read it and said that's exactly what it was like growing up at Axtown, which is what they call the Yarrington Colony. It talks about the alcoholism and the opioid use and the difficulty of coming in from a native culture into an Anglo culture in that time. It's a fascinating book. My dad got it and he read it, and my dad was born in 29, and so he read it and knew a lot of the people, and he would laugh at part of it and he would say that's exactly what it was like. So I think for some people that's what it was like. For others it was different, but it identifies the difficult eras. But it's an inspiration to me because that's who I am. That's where I come from. And then I've used it in some tribal court cases as authority for tribal law and history, and it was interesting when I did that because the judge was like, well, hadn't heard of that one before. The other book is The Four Agreements. That is, you look at the Four Agreements, and if you read nothing else but what the Four Agreements are, it's a life lesson. And if you can live your life by those Four Agreements and be true to yourself, I think that's one of the best roadmaps there is to doing a good life.
Cheri, what transformative experiences, if any, really brought you through to where you are today?
I think the biggest factor, transformative experience, is being the younger twin. My twin sister is 7 minutes older than I am, and she has always said, I am the oldest, I am the boss, and that works for me. Whenever there's a problem, whenever I have trouble, I call her up and she tells me, well, this is how you can fix it. This is what I suggest. When I was up at UNR, it was very traumatizing going through my freshman year registration, I was totally lost. I had no idea where to go, how to start, what to do. And my twin Yvonne went and got all of her classes, got everything done. Then she came back for me and she said, this is how we're going to do it. And she walked me through and got my classes registered. The one thing she did make me take was a swimming class because I didn't know how to swim. And that was life-changing, which is interesting because you don't think that a swimming class will do that, but that has stayed with me for 40 years. But my twin has been the most so being second out of twins has been the initial start. The second, I think I had my oldest son when I was a senior in high school. And when I graduated from UNR, I had one of my high school teachers who was a professor say, I was so proud of you, I didn't think you could make it. And I was so set back by, why was that even a thought? And then when I decided to go to law school, I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want to have somebody say, well, you're not going to make it. But I needed to tell my then employer that I was going to school, and I asked for a recommendation. And he said, well, that's a lofty goal, but don't think you'll get in. And then I had other people who said, why are you doing that? And I left my oldest son, who was 6 at the time when I started and 9 when I graduated, with my parents. He stayed with them while I went to school. And that was very difficult. And I still feel guilt from that. But at the same time, I look at how successful he is. And that was transforming. He's a chiropractor, has his own business now. And I tell him he's a true Indian doctor because he loves his work. That was transforming. And I think our children are always the things that transform us and define us. And my youngest one has taught me to love myself. He was very difficult early on, but like he says now, you're my best friend and my biggest hero. So I think your children help define who you are and are transformative. And then I finally got married when I was 42. Took me a while, but I got my MRS degree finally. And my husband is very, very, a very good person, a very good man. And that's who helps me be a farmer. Without my husband, the farming would be too hard. And he's my main mechanic, my main welder, and he keeps us up and going.
And this is a real love of yours.
Oh, yes. I've been in love with my husband for years. Even though we got married when we were 42, I've known him since I was 11. And just, yes.
How neat. How neat.
Getting married for me was a big transition. I was 42. I had come to the conclusion that I would never be married, that I was happy being single, and I didn't need that type of support. I started going out with my husband that I had known since I was 11, and he was the family friend. He was had always been part of our family. My parents welcomed him into the home like he was one of the brothers, and then we started dating, and it was having the butterflies when you're 42. And he was just a really good friend. And then it was all of a sudden, where have you been all my life? And I just hadn't looked at him. And then I looked at him, and he was the best thing that has happened in a long time. What I have learned from my life lessons is don't take life too seriously. That there's always a wonderful surprise waiting around the corner that is better than yesterday. And hurry up and let's see what's next. I was talking to a good friend of mine. We were at a funeral, and she's a older person. And I said, you know, I can't wait to see what happens next. And she says, what do you mean? And I said, well, don't be afraid of dying, because this life's been a hell of a ride. Can you imagine what's next? And I think that's how you need to take life. You see who you're going to meet. Tomorrow you get a new life friend. And life friends are those people who stay with you for life, that change the way you think, that bring new opportunities, that believe in you no matter what. That's the new. I think that's what I look forward to.
What about failures? How has that helped you grow, or have they?
Failures always help you grow. I've learned that you survive a broken heart. It feels like you won't, but you will always survive the broken heart. But that once you figure out what the lesson is, then the surprise shows up around the street on the next corner. Failures are they tell you where not to go, because you're not supposed to be there. If way back when I was just out of UNR, after I had graduated from UNR with my business degree, I applied for a job and I know I wasn't even considered. I got the turn down like the next day. So there was not even, I don't think they even looked at my resume. And you know, you're sitting there and you're trying to figure out, now what am I supposed to do? Well, I just wasn't supposed to go there. I wasn't supposed to be there in it. And thank goodness that I didn't get the job, because then I would never have gone to law school. And after UNR, I had my degree and I was going to go out and conquer the world, and I couldn't get a decent job. I couldn't pay the bills. My plants were frozen. I couldn't afford to turn the power on. And so your failures, if once you get past the heartbreak, then you look at what opportunity is knocking on this other door, and that's where your failures are. They lead you to the new opportunities.
That's a great philosophy. Cheri, we know we're always important in our family, but what about outside your family circle? How would you like to be remembered?
This is one of the hardest questions I've thought about in a long time, of how I would like to be remembered. I've had a number of family deaths this year, and so you trying to figure out what to put on the headstone. You know, and it's an interesting exercise, if nothing else. But I think I would like to be remembered by someone who danced to their own tune, that I tried my best and did my best, and that if somebody needed help, if I had the means to do so, I would help anybody who needs the help. And that I have, through my actions, I have taught my children how to be that type of person, and other people how to be that type of person. There was a homeless person at In-N-Out the other day that was hungry, wanted something to eat, and I said, "Come on in, let's order you whatever you want," because I'm fortunate enough that I could afford to purchase that person a meal and to honor them. And I think that if nothing else, that I honor everybody, even those who are different, those who have taught me the hard lessons, those who have taught me the kind lessons, that I just love people.
You've had a very full life, and certainly have some advice for young women coming up. What would you give for advice to a young lady that is entering adulthood, both career-wise and giving back to the community involvement?
My advice to a young woman is to do what your heart tells you, and don't be afraid of social criticism. If you want to be single and have children, be single and have children. And do what makes you happy. Do what you think is right. As long as you're not hurting somebody, to hell with the norms and society's judgments. Because those are the ones who will make life changes that will change the world. And follow your heart, and whatever you want to do, do that. I received a lot of criticism for not being married when I had my children, and they are my biggest joy. I received a lot of criticism for going to school and having my parents help me raise my children, and that has been my biggest success. And so do what in your heart, what makes you happy, instead of what society tells you you need to do. For young women, and I think not just young women, but all young people, to make your community a better place, to help those who are less fortunate than you, and to help those who are more fortunate to you. Sometimes that's more difficult. If you see someone who you think they have everything, to tell them good morning and have a good day. Is there anything I can do for you? Doing random acts of kindness would be one of the biggest things that I think you can do for your community. And because those will make a bigger impact on the everyday lives. It's nice to be organized in your community service. I think those are very important things, but also on your journey to those organized events, do the random acts as well, the unplanned opportunities that present themselves. You never know when your angel's going to be hanging close to you, and that's who you're going to be picking up and carrying with you.
Thank you very much for sharing this interview with us. It was an honor.
Thank you. It was an honor being asked.